Dean Martin stopped his entire show for a 9-year-old, the moment that left 2,400 people in tears. It was a moment that nobody saw coming. On stage, surrounded by laughter and applause, Dean Martin was performing as usual when something caught his eye, something that stopped him in his tracks. A young boy, barely 9 years old, was sitting quietly, clearly struggling with something that made the rest of the audience hold their breath. And then he did something no one expected. "Where are you watching from?" The lights shone brightly over the packed theater, and the laughter filled the air like a warm embrace. Dean Martin, the epitome of charm and comedic brilliance, stood before the audience, effortlessly commanding their attention. But on that particular night, something changed. A child, sitting near the front, was having a hard time. While the adults around him were caught in the buzz of excitement, the little boy's face was a picture of anxiety. His mother sat next to him, glancing nervously at her son. The moment was more than just a performance. It was a turning point, a risk that could redefine Dean's career in ways he hadn't expected. Dean Martin had always been the embodiment of confidence. His voice, his humor, his charm. He had it all. He'd built an empire of laughter, commanding respect from the biggest names in Hollywood and music alike. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who had faced his own battles. He wasn't born into this fame, and his rise wasn't without its sacrifices. Losing his son to a tragic accident had shaken him to his core, but it also forged resilience in him that he would later rely on in moments of uncertainty. That night, as he saw the young boy struggling, Dean's heart, unexplainably, went to the child. Perhaps it was the memories of his own children, or the fatherly instincts he had buried over time. Regardless, something inside him urged him to act. Dean's eyes remained locked on the child as his hand hovered over the microphone. The audience waited for him to resume his routine. A hint of discomfort settled into the air. A few in the crowd chuckled, thinking it was part of the show, but Dean didn't laugh. He had the power to ignore the tension, but the more he saw the boy struggle, the more he felt compelled to do something. The room grew still, the momentum of the show slipping away. What if he embarrassed himself? What if this wasn't what people came for? There were whispers from the back, doubts circling, but Dean's mind was made up. He would not ignore this moment. Not this time. Not with this child. With a deep breath, Dean made his move. He stepped away from the microphone, his usual charm replaced with a rare vulnerability. "Excuse me, folks," he began, his voice soft but clear. "This isn't part of the show, but I need to address something." The audience was confused, murmuring among themselves. Was this a joke? A gag? But then Dean's gaze remained fixed on the young boy. "I see you there, kid," Dean continued. "I see what you're going through. We've all been there. Let's take a moment, all right?" The boy, wide-eyed, couldn't believe what was happening. The entire room seemed to pause, as if holding its collective breath. The silence in the theater was almost tangible. Dean took a few steps toward the boy, who now looked like a deer caught in headlights. The boy's mother was visibly shaking, unsure of how to react. Was this a kind gesture? A pitying one? But then Dean, with no hint of condescension, crouched down to the boy's level. "Hey, it's okay. You don't have to hide it. We all have bad days." The audience, who had come for comedy and spectacle, was now fully invested in this unplanned interaction. Dean was showing them something deeper than humor, a rare glimpse into a man who understood what it was like to feel invisible, scared, and alone. What followed next was a gesture that no one saw coming. Dean didn't rush. He let the moment stretch out, not for comic effect, but for the sheer power of human connection. "You're stronger than you think," he said to the young boy, his voice calm but filled with warmth. The tension in the room began to dissolve. The boy, who had been holding back tears, now blinked rapidly as if trying to process what was happening. Dean smiled and gently gestured to the audience. "Look at all these people here. They've got your back." A subtle shift occurred. The crowd, sensing something profound, began to applaud softly. The boy, still uncertain, smiled faintly. His mother, overwhelmed with emotion, whispered a thank you to Dean. This wasn't a typical show. This was real, and it had started to touch everyone in ways they hadn't expected. Dean wasn't just a performer now. He was a protector of dignity, offering comfort in a world that often overlooked those who needed it the most. But despite the tender moment, the pressure was mounting on Dean. His managers and crew, standing in the wings, exchanged nervous glances. This was an unscripted moment, and there were real concerns about how it would affect the rest of the show. Was this a misstep? Should they push the boy off stage and get back to business as usual? The audience, meanwhile, was more quiet than ever. The emotional energy had shifted. People weren't just waiting to laugh now, they were waiting for the next move. It was as if the room had been divided into two worlds. On one side, the world of spectacle and entertainment. On the other, the world of humanity, stripped of the lights and glamour. Dean could feel the weight of the expectations pressing in on him. He had always been good at controlling the stage, but this moment was different. This wasn't about applause or praise. It was about something more vulnerable, more lasting. His instinct was to protect the boy's dignity, even if it meant risking his own. The murmurs from the back grew louder as Dean knelt in front of the boy. "You know," Dean began, breaking the silence, "I wasn't always the man you see up here. I've been knocked down, I've lost things I can never get back, and I've struggled just like everyone else. But here's the thing, you don't have to hide. Not here. Not in front of all these people." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The boy's lips trembled as he looked up at Dean, searching his face for any hint of insincerity. But there was none. Dean was being real with him. For once, the legend wasn't playing to the crowd. He was talking to a single person, a child in need of reassurance. As the boy nodded slightly, Dean's heart tightened. This wasn't just a good deed. This was a reminder of the things that truly mattered in life. Dean stood slowly, feeling the gaze of every person in the theater. There was a shift, a collective understanding. The audience wasn't just watching a celebrity in a show. They were witnessing a real, raw moment of human connection. For a brief second, Dean doubted himself. Could he go back to the routine now? Would the audience feel shortchanged? But before he could think too much, a cheer broke out. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew. A ripple of applause washed over him, a sign of respect not just for the entertainer, but for the man who had shown courage in the face of vulnerability. Dean caught the boy's eye one more time, giving him a soft wink. The child's face softened, his fear melting away, replaced by a quiet strength. Dean knew that this would be a moment none of them would forget. Not the audience, not the boy, and certainly not him. As the applause faded, Dean took a step back toward the microphone, still feeling the weight of the moment. The boy, now smiling, gave him a shy thumbs up. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Dean gave a small bow, acknowledging the audience's response. "I think we've done enough for tonight," he said, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the emotion he had kept hidden. The audience was on its feet now, clapping louder. Dean's usual charisma and wit were gone for the night, replaced by something raw, something deeper. There was no scripted punchline, no planned joke, only a shared experience that transcended performance. The show, in a way, had just ended, but the story had just begun. The crowd, still applauding, understood that the real magic wasn't in the jokes. It was in this moment of unexpected humanity. Dean Martin had stopped his show for a child, and in doing so, he had touched every heart in that room. Backstage, the crew was in a frenzy. Some were concerned about the performance, others about the logistics of it all. But all that mattered was what the audience had witnessed. The stage manager approached Dean, his face a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Dean, that was incredible, but are you sure this is what you want? The show's running late, and—" Dean cut him off, raising a hand. "It's fine," he said softly. "Sometimes the show isn't about timing. It's about the moment, and that moment meant more to me than anything else we could have planned." He paused, looking at the boy again, who was now sitting with his mother, beaming. "We've spent so long giving people what they want. Tonight, we gave them what they needed. Let's let that be enough." The crew was silent, their minds processing what had just happened. This wasn't just another performance. This was a reminder that, sometimes, the most powerful moments come when you least expect them. In the audience, the energy had shifted. The earlier tension had been replaced by a sense of shared understanding, and as Dean returned to the microphone, he didn't need to say much. "All right, folks," he smiled, his voice now back to its usual smooth charm. "Let's get back to it, shall we?" The laughter rippled through the room, but it wasn't the same. The jokes felt lighter now, more genuine. Dean had always been able to make people laugh, but now, it was as if they were laughing with him, not just at him. The moment with the boy had turned the entire show into something more intimate, more human. The audience saw him as a man, not just an entertainer. They respected him for the way he handled a situation that could have been brushed aside. In that moment, Dean Martin became not just a performer, but a figure who would be remembered not for his jokes, but for his heart. As the show continued, whispers filled the air. It was clear that people weren't talking about the punchlines or the performances anymore. The buzz was about Dean's decision to stop everything for a child. "Did you see that? He just stopped the show for him," a woman whispered to her friend, her eyes wide. "That was incredible," her friend replied, nodding. "I've never seen anyone do something like that." The power had shifted. What had begun as a show, a spectacle, had transformed into something profoundly human. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were feeling. They were part of something bigger than the lights and laughter. The stories they would tell later weren't about the jokes or the songs, but about the moment Dean Martin had stopped everything for a child in need. And that moment, small as it might have seemed, would stay with them for years to come. After the show, Dean met with the boy and his mother in the dressing room. The boy's eyes were still bright, his earlier fear replaced by a sense of pride. "Thank you," the boy said softly, looking up at Dean. "I didn't think anyone would notice, but you did." Dean smiled, bending down to his level. "Kid, you don't need to hide what you feel. You're stronger than you know. I've been where you are. Just remember, it's okay to let people in." The mother, overcome with emotion, wiped her eyes. "I can't believe you did that," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "You didn't have to, but you did. That was something I'll never forget." Dean nodded, his own heart swelling with pride. Sometimes, it's not about what we have to do. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. The room was silent for a moment as they shared that quiet understanding. The night had changed them all. Word of the incident quickly spread. The following days saw stories about the moment Dean Martin stopped his show for a child. Newspapers, radio, and television stations were abuzz with the story, but not for the usual reasons. This wasn't about a celebrity stunt or a staged performance. It was about humanity. Dean's act of kindness had struck a chord far deeper than any scripted comedy ever could. People across the country were moved by his gesture, and his fans saw him not just as an entertainer, but as a man who understood the true value of empathy and compassion. His fans flooded social media with messages of support, applauding him for his heart and his courage. The world, it seemed, had been waiting for a moment like this, where a legend didn't just entertain, but genuinely cared. Dean Martin had become more than a star. He had become a symbol of kindness in an industry often known for its callousness. As Dean read through the letters and messages pouring in, he began to realize just how far-reaching his actions had been. It wasn't just his fans who were moved. People from all walks of life had reached out to express their gratitude. A teacher wrote in, saying that the story of the boy had inspired her to connect more deeply with her students, to see their struggles before anything else. A father sent a message, telling Dean that his own son had been struggling with anxiety, and that seeing how Dean had treated the boy had given him hope. It was overwhelming. Dean had always been accustomed to praise for his performances, but this was different. The messages didn't talk about his voice or his wit. They talked about his heart, his courage to be vulnerable in front of an audience. And though Dean had spent his career entertaining people, he now realized that this one act of compassion had left a mark far greater than any show he'd ever performed. The boy and his mother stayed in touch with Dean after the show. The mother, once apprehensive and unsure about whether her son would ever feel accepted in a public setting, was now filled with nothing but gratitude. She could see the change in her son, a confidence he hadn't had before. He had seen something that night, something deeper than the performance on stage. The boy had learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, that it was okay to show your true self. As they exchanged messages, The boy would often send Dean drawings he'd made, pictures of Dean performing, but with a new element. The boy was always in the audience, watching with admiration. It wasn't just that the boy had witnessed a famous performer's kindness. He had experienced a profound shift in his perception of himself. Dean had given him something far more valuable than any autograph could have: the gift of self-acceptance. In the aftermath of the incident, Dean took some time to reflect on the weight of what had happened. He was no longer just a man standing on stage telling jokes. He was a man who had stood up for a young soul in need of encouragement. He realized that the true essence of his career wasn't about entertaining the masses for the sake of fame. It was about connecting with people in ways that went beyond applause and laughter. The moment with the boy had stirred something in him, a realization that he could use his platform for more than just entertainment. Dean started advocating for youth programs, focusing on mental health, and offering scholarships to young talent who, like the boy, needed someone to believe in them. He began to see his role not just as a performer, but as someone who could leave a lasting impact on the world beyond the stage. In the end, it wasn't about the legacy of his songs or films. It was about the lives he touched with simple acts of kindness. As months passed, the boy's story continued to spread. News outlets covered the tale of the night Dean Martin stopped his show, and the story was shared across the globe. People saw the clip, and it resonated with them in ways they hadn't expected. Dean had not just changed the boy's life. He had touched the hearts of people who hadn't believed in the goodness of humanity for a long time. Fans who had been there that night often recounted the moment to others. They talked about how Dean, a man with so much to lose, had chosen to take a risk for something greater than his own fame. The boy's mother, years later, would still speak of how that night had shaped her son's life, how it had allowed him to embrace who he was, flaws and all. Dean never realized how profound an effect his small act would have on the world, but it was clear. This was his true legacy. Years later, the story of that night remained a legend. It was a story told not just in Hollywood circles, but in classrooms, living rooms, and across generations. The lesson was simple but powerful. Kindness, especially when it's given in the most unexpected of moments, can change a life forever. Dean Martin's gesture had reminded people that, despite the noise of the world, there was always room for compassion. As Dean himself often said in his later years, sometimes the loudest thing in the room isn't the applause or the laughter. It's the silence that comes after a simple act of kindness. And so, the story lived on, passed from one generation to the next, inspiring others to stop what they were doing, to look for the person who needed help, and to act, not for applause, but for the simple dignity of a fellow human being. Dean Martin's legacy wasn't just built on his career. It was in the lives he changed with his quiet courage. What moment in your life has made you reflect on the power of kindness? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.